On this episode, we are talking about 1998's The Faculty. We'll be talking about football, Super Bowl predictions, science fiction, aliens, and much more. I'm Captain Nostalgia, and this is the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness through pop culture. So buckle in before Dan and I get turned into aliens. The show starts right now. So every year, we at Victims and Villains, we're not typically a sports podcast, but we always run this, we always do a Super Bowl episode. And in the past, we've done Gridiron Gang and continued that tradition last year with Waterboy. And we turned it out to you guys and asked what movie you guys wanted us to hear us cover for Super Bowl 2021. And Dan, you're more of a football guy than I am. And so I got weird with my picks this year. I tried to pick the most absurd football movies that I could think of or that I could come across on Letterboxd and Google. And I picked The Faculty and Jeepers Creepers 2.
Yeah, I went into this movie expecting something like a Remember the Titans or Gridiron Gang, and then I got this super weird crossover between The Thing and The Breakfast Club, and I was not expecting it at all. But obviously this movie was great. I really enjoyed it. Seeing this cast list was insane. There were so many great people in it. It really feels like an 80s movie set in the 90s with a lot of those practical effects and those like monster effects they did really well with. And yeah, this movie is super weird. I'm really happy that it's the one that ended up getting picked. And yeah, you said, I'm more into football. As a rule, I'm not a sports person. I was not athletic growing up. I never really liked sports. I do enjoy football, partially because I see a video game when I'm watching a game. It just looks like a real-time strategy to me, and that makes it more entertaining. Also, being from New England, the Patriots have been pretty exciting to watch the past several years. Not so much this season, but I still follow Tom Brady pretty closely, and he is going to the Super Bowl this year, which I'm excited about. And one of my other favorite quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, is also. So it's going to be a really cool showdown between the two of them. I think it'll be a really fun game to watch, and the Weeknd is doing the halftime show. So it should be a pretty great time for that as well. But yeah, this movie was definitely a interesting theme to have as the football pick, but I'm really happy that it won our poll.
It should also be worth noting that we are covering the Faculty from this episode, and Dan went pretty traditional in his picks and did The Blind Side and Safety, which we just covered the new John Lee Hancock film, The Little Things. You guys can also check out wherever you guys get on your podcast. It was a good episode for a underwhelming movie, but The Faculty is not underwhelming at all. This also, for me, was a first-time viewing. I knew aliens took place within this realm at some point, and I was just waiting on it. And the way that they introduce it, I honestly, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about some of this stuff. And like, but I mean, you talk about it feeling like that 80s movie where, in the 80s, John Hughes movies always cast it like the who's who of the Brat Pack, whether that was Molly Ringwald, Matthew Broderick, Emilio Estevez. Emilio! If you guys have seen A Night at the Roxbury, you guys get that. But this one, I mean, it does the same thing with its adult and its young cast, which was interesting to go through it. You have Selma-Hayek, Jon-Stewart, Famke Janssen on the adult side, and then also Christopher McDonald. And you also have, Elijah Wood, Josh-Harnett. Usher is in this, which is so weird for me to think about.
Yeah, that threw me off when I saw that. I was like, Usher. And this is so early, too. In the credits, they give his full name. There's a first and last name there in the end credits, which I was really surprised. This was like before Usher became Usher.
Usher Raymond. Yeah, it's really weird. He once upon a time actually did have a acting career that, unless you grew up in the 90s and or the early 2000s, you don't remember that. But he did at one point in fact have a acting career.
Yeah, this is such a strange movie when you have Frodo Baggins, the T-1000, Jean Grey, Jon-Stewart. Like, it's just so many of these well-known people. And so Robert Patrick, who plays the T-1000 in Terminator 2, he plays the coach in this movie. I feel like I don't see him often enough in things, and so whenever I do, it makes me so happy, because Terminator 2 is one of my all-time favorite movies, and seeing him, it just brings me so much joy, because his performance in that is so iconic as the evil Terminator. And it was so great seeing him be like the angry, just screaming coach. But then he was also be able to play the more subdued version, like when he was the alien, right? And he was trying to like blend in a little bit more. So it was funny seeing his different character roles there.
He is, I think, very much an underappreciated actor. He, a couple years after this movie, would go on the X-Files, kind of try to reformat their show to where it wasn't Mulder and Scully, but you had that same like archetype of like believer and skeptic. And he ended up actually taking over for the Scully character for the final 2 seasons of that show. And he did a really good job with it. I mean, they're kind of notoriously bad seasons, but he did a decent job with it. And I still really enjoy Robert Patrick when I kind of get to see him in things, and he was such a good choice for one of the primary antagonists within this movie. I mean, obviously, you know, talking spoilers, it's aliens, and you have a queen alien, but I think Robert Patrick just has that very much intimidating presence about him, but he's can also be oddly charming. So I don't know why no one has ever cast him as like a serial killer. Be really good for it. But I think he did a really good job in here. And kind of backing up a little bit, this is the same year that Big Daddy came out, and a lot of people don't remember this, but Jon Stewart, way back when, used to be an actor before he did The Daily Show and before he was a political activist. And man, he is oddly intimidating in this movie. I don't know if you felt that, but like the scene where it's like the kids in his classroom, and he kind of starts to slide a little bit into like that evil character. He was oddly intimidating, and I was like, I know this is only a 5-minute scene, but it is impactful.
Yeah, he is. He pushes his kids really hard, and he's. It's funny when you look at like football coach characters, because I feel like in movies like these, they're either like really wholesome and they're there to really support the kids and help them like reach their full potential, kind of like The Rock in Gridiron Gang, and then other times you just have them as these just like complete like alpha male asshole characters who just like borderline abusive, and they're just not good people. And I feel like you have this where he seems to be kind of in the middle, like he wants his team to win and he's willing to do anything. And he kind of gives that the star quarterback there, he gives him a hard time when he wants to quit. Yep. And he's like, you're my star quarterback. We got a huge game tomorrow, but like that's fine. You can walk out. Like that's no big deal. But I love that we show that resolve in that quarterback character, though, because he kind of breaks the mold of like, I don't just want to be known for football. Like I want to do well. I want to get my grades up. Like I want to get into college for something other than just my arm. And he really wants to go prove himself, which I thought was like a really cool introspective mental health angle for a movie that's about aliens taking over teachers.
Yeah, they do a really good job at bringing a lot of depth to these characters. And Stan in particular, I feel like, is one of the more sympathetic characters and one of the more relatable characters, because this is an embarrassing story I will tell about myself, but way back when, I used to watch a lot of reality TV, and part of my viewing habits were Girls Next Door, which was the Hugh Hefner show, and then Kendra, one of the Playmates, got a spinoff, and it was a story about her and her husband, who was at the time playing for the NFL, and she said something that I've never really forgotten when it comes to football, and it's National Football League is what we think of when we think of NFL, but it basically, in her book, she says, I wanted job security because NFL really stands for not for long. And I love the fact that they kind of brought that mantra to the Stan character, to where he understands that this is a period in his life where he might be the star of football, but he wants to think of the bigger things, and he wants to be seen as more than just the guy that happens to be really good at throwing a football. And I think that brings a lot of depth to his character, because, who really enjoys kind of being typecasted as, that would be like me getting typecasted as, oh, yeah, I'm the guy that likes horror movies. Well, yeah, I enjoy horror movies, but I also equally like superhero movies and international movies, and I like to have a good laugh and a good cry, and I love film in general. Like, I don't want to be typecasted to one genre, and I think that over the course of 3 years that Stan experiences that, you can kind of really start to see that weigh in on him. There's a great scene where he's talking with one of the other girls, and he's sharing the story about how he won like a national championship or a big game, and he had earned this D on this paper, and teacher changed it to an A because of his arm or something along those lines. And he's like, I wanted that D because I worked hard and I studied for that D. Like, that is what I deserve.
Yeah, no one really likes being typecasted as one thing or just having one talent. Something that I've gotten, it's funny that it bothers me because it's so dumb, but especially in work and my day job, a lot of people, because I go to the movies a lot and I see a lot of movies, especially like new Marvel movies that come out, people are like, oh, like, Dan's this huge Marvel fan, like Captain America, like, he's just like, oh, he's like the biggest fan in the world, which is not true. Don't get me wrong, I love those movies, I really enjoy them, but to me, when I look at like a Marvel fan, like someone who's into that, it's someone who reads the comics, knows all the backstories, knows all the different multiverse things. I don't know that. I just watch the movies. I go to the theater and I spend 2.5 hours watching Captain America punch Nazis in the face. Like that's my level of fandom, and I don't think it's accurate when people try to pigeon me as like the biggest Marvel guy, because that's just not true. I've seen the 20 or so movies that are in the MCU, and that's really all I know about it. I've never picked up a comic. I don't really know like the Civil War storyline in the comics, but I've seen the movie, which I know is different. But it's it's just funny because it's like there are some things that I am really into, and I try to know as much as I can about them, and I love to talk and debate them, whether, things like Zelda and Star Wars. So it's funny when someone will pull and hold on to something like that and be like, well, this is something that you really know a lot about. It's actually not. And, Josh, you're a big comics guy. I know you really love DC. I love like Batman movies, The Dark Knight, but I'm sure you know way, way more about Batman and are in general more of a committed fan than I am as someone who, just goes to the theater whenever they bring out a new live action film.
You would think so, but I've actually, in more recent years, I've kind of gotten away from getting into the comics because I just kind of like got to this point where I was like, how many times can I see Batman battle the Joker? How many times can you see Lex Luthor try and kill Superman? Like, it just kind of becomes redundant after so long. And like, don't get me wrong, like I still am fans of like stories within those things, but like Harley Quinn was my favorite run to read. But more recently, like I've been getting into a lot of the more obscure characters as far as like the DC Pantheon is concerned with Mr. Miracle and Adam Strange, and just the runs that Tom King has been doing, which have been incredible. But I digress. I think too, it's like, yeah, and one of the things that kind of really turned me off at first about, like, to go back to horror movies was I had friends that would be like, if horror is not all you watch, then you're not a true fan. And it's like, man, like, that really kind of like bugs me. And so, like, getting out of that mindset and kind of getting to know other people within the genre, like, I've enjoyed getting to see horror movies that I normally wouldn't, but, like, I enjoy, like, having conversations with people in the horror community that aren't just about horror. Like, one of our writers here, Mark Moore, is a huge horror fan. Me and him cover probably most of the horror content that goes up on our website, but, like, he's also, like, an extremely talented miniature painter, and, like, that's, like, his, like, huge passion. Like, he loves cooking and, like, all of that stuff. Like, I've learned in the last year just getting to know him past horror movies. And so I think that sometimes community can get stopped because it gets hung up on stereotypes and what you think people are about. And when you pigeonhole ideas or label someone as, oh, this person can't be more than a Marvel fan or can't be more than a video game person, that really damages community, which in turn can also damage mental health.
And I want to walk back a little bit of what I just said, because at the risk of sounding gatekeeping, like if someone's more of a fan or less of a fan, if you love something, like, I don't think it really matters to what extent you're familiar with it, or if you, for example, I don't, despite what I just said, if you just like the Marvel movies and you just like the superheroes in those movies, I don't think that makes you more or less of a fan necessarily than people who read the comics. I don't want to gatekeep like that, because that's not a good thing. I just think for myself, what I identify as when someone says, like, I'm the biggest Marvel person ever, no, if I was, I would be far more entrenched in these worlds than I actually am. But it's important to make sure that you're open to more diverse like activities or hobbies or whatever it is you want to do. For me, my full-time job, I'm a writer, I'm an editor. That's what I love to do. That's what I'm committing my life to. But there's so much more to me beyond that, between being someone who loves video games and someone who loves movies and someone who has more recently gotten more into, like, being physically active and working out. And it's like there's so many different pieces to it that make up who I am, more than just that one thing. And I really think is Stan the character name who was the football quarterback?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Stan in this movie, he gets that. And first of all, this kid, he's like 17, 18 years old. Like, he has this realization at a time that people take many, many more years to really start to figure out. Yep. And I'm really impressed with how, like, down to earth he is, especially, and again, stereotype for a football player. Like, he's really interested, and to the point where you have the character of Delilah, who is, I think she mentioned she's a journalist, and is she the head cheerleader? She makes some comment to that, but then we never see her cheerlead in the movie.
Yeah, so the reason that Stan and Delilah are together is because, as she says, quote, it's the social hierarchy of high school, is that the star quarterback is supposed to be with the head cheerleader, and you do never see her cheerlead, but also, man, that, like, little side conversation, like, I hated her as a character, like, as an introduction that way.
Yeah, she seems like you think she would be more, like, open and not as judgmental, but she comes across right away. And I love Elijah Wood has a quote fairly early on in the movie where he says something. He's like, "Oh, like, are you? You're pretty cool when you're not being such a." And he kind of pauses. And she like smiles and she's like, such a what? And he just like looks at her just deadpan. He's like, a stone cold bitch. Like he just calls her out. And I love that moment where it's like, oh man, like, yeah, like she's just been so mean this whole movie so far. Like it's nice to just have someone, and she just kind of laughs at it. Like she knows what she's like. She knows what people think of her, but she doesn't really seem to care, which I also kind of respect. Like, you know, own who you are in a way. Like that's pretty cool.
I think, too, if we can go back to the original encounter where Stan kind of talks to her about, you know, wanting to quit the football team and just kind of how unsupportive she is of that she cares more about the social hierarchy than she does, you know, the actual feelings of her boyfriend. I think that we talked about that in The Little Things, where you want to make sure that your identity is not getting wrapped up in what you do, but actually who you are, for one. And for two, also making sure that you're surrounding yourself with the right community. Because if you are not surrounding yourself with a good community that is going to support you in your mental health decisions, they're going to end up being very toxic to your mental health, and it's going to be almost a like version or to a degree of Stockholm syndrome by the time that all comes collapsing in on itself.
Yeah, it's one of these stories where it's things like these students who haven't really spent much time together. They need to come together because they're the only ones that really realize what's going on. And I love like each character introduction in this film, and the students, kind of similar to what Scream does, where I feel like it almost misleads you in the beginning with the main character. Like this really opens with some of the faculty members, and we see kind of follow like their day and what happens, and then the ultimate attack with the coach like actually attacking that other teacher, and then we start to see the students come in and slowly start to realize what's going on.
So, all right, since we're talking about the beginning, did you grow up with Magic School Bus?
Oh yeah, big Magic School Bus fan.
Random question here for you. The faculty members are having a meeting in the beginning of them, and I guess it's the principal that's like trying to basically, like, they're talking about finances and kind of where everything's going to go, and you kind of really use this meeting as a stepping stone to kind of understand how much of a role football plays within this town. But there's a teacher that I don't remember her name right off the top of my head, but she's one of the lead aliens in this. And before she makes the turn to be like a full alien, she looks like the teacher from Magic School Bus, right?
Miss Frizzle. Yeah, I think I can see that in a way. Like if there was a live action version of her. That's a really funny and random connection to make. This movie was the late 90s too. Like that was around the same time as Magic School Bus. So who knows? Magic School Bus clearly inspired the faculty, is I think the takeaway from that.
Like I just couldn't unsee that. Like once I made that connection, I was like her curls are almost exactly the same. Like the only difference is that the teacher in the faculty actually has glasses, whereas Miss Frizzle doesn't.
That is true. Yeah, that's really funny, and it's when we see the brutal nature of like that, when that teacher at night is escaping, the coach is attacking her, she manages to get out of the school, and it's this really stressful moment, and then she just gets stabbed by that other teacher, and it's like, oh man, like it reminds me of there's a moment in the first Purge movie where our main characters, they seem like they've been saved from these people trying to kill them, and then you come to discover, no, the people who saved them just wanted the opportunity to kill them themselves. So it's like, oh no, we're saved, but now we're in a way worse situation. Not great.
Yeah, that opening scene is kind of brutal, but I will say that I think out of every transition that exists in here is going to either, for me, it'll either be Selma-Hayek's Sick Nurse, which is such a weird juxtaposition from like Sexy Vampire and From Dusk Till Dawn to Sick Nurse. Okay, Robert
they
Rodriguez.
could have made her a sexy school nurse. Why didn't they do that?
I mean, once she transitions, that's a whole nother story. But her transition is kind of the first time that us as the audience, we get to see that transition happen, and kind of really how these aliens are able to change the adults and how their metamorphosis works. But the shower sequence where Stan's in the shower and you have the teacher that walks up and like her skin's just like starting to like drip off and like she's like burnt, and that was a brutal scene for me. And I have a pretty high tolerance for blood, but I mean that kind of like gave me Shining vibes right there. Shining vibes.
Yeah, so I have to ask, because this is like something that's so propagated by pop culture, I feel like, and I wonder if it's a misnomer or if there's any truth to it. Did you ever shower for gym class in high school?
Not once.
Like, me neither. Like,
Not
that
once.
wasn't a thing. Like, there was a locker room, you would get changed. No one was full on naked. Like, you had underwear, you would change into your gym clothes. But there was no shower, no group shower room like what this movie implies. And I've seen that trope so many times in high school movies of like all the kids in a shower room together. And I'm like, did that ever happen? Or is this just something we're being led to believe from movies? Like, I don't know if there's any truth, if anyone in their high school career. So if you're listening, if in high school you ever had to shower with a bunch of your classmates in a big room, please let us know, because I want to know your story. And also, I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'll speak for myself. There's, I think in American Pie, they make fun of the Eddie K. Thomas character for wearing a bathing suit in the shower. I'm just going to say it. If I had to group shower, I would probably do the same thing. Even in the locker room in the gym, like I make sure I'm covered by a towel before I change anything. Not because I have any, modesty. I don't really, but I also know that like people don't go to the gym to look at me without clothing. So I try to not force that on other people. Anyways, weird aside there. But anytime I see like a group shower in a high school scene, I'm just like, that is so, so weird.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. Yeah, my middle school had showers in our locker room, but they were all broken. We never used them. They, in fact, actually used them as a storage room. And the only time that I ever like came close to having those group showers was when you would the rule was my middle school had a pool, so when you would go in, you had to like you get in your bathing suit, you had to like shower for a few minutes, and then you were allowed to go in, and then you'd come and shower off all the chlorine and then get ready for the next period. But I mean, that's the closest that I've ever actually been to it. But those years in my life taught me how to be very skilled with dressing and undressing in a towel.
So then I can infer you went to a rich school then, because you had a pool in your school, is what that tells me.
Not at all.
My high school, it's funny, I grew up in a fairly upper middle class suburb of Boston, and but my high school did not have a pool. The vocational school nearby did have a pool, and so a couple of my friends were not on our high school swim team. They were on the vocational high school swim team, and they would go up there and do practice and meets and stuff, which was pretty funny because we didn't have a pool for them to join. But yeah, that shower scene, and this is where I feel like we get into the practical effects of what is really reminiscent of the 80s, because the skin is just like burning off, and it's just so super gross, and it's like so nightmarish, and that was definitely a moment that really stuck with me throughout this entire movie. Yeah,
and so I want to transition a little bit to the football element, since this is our Super Bowl 3 episode, and it's interesting to me that I don't know if you ever saw the movie Concussion that was released a few years ago.
I have not. I've wanted to, though. Is that the one with Will Smith?
Yeah. So for listeners that may or may not know, Will Smith plays a doctor that it's based on a true story, but like the doctor kind of started uncovering like head injuries and kind of started to realize that like people that were playing Major League Football were actually like damaging their like skulls and like parts of their brain, and he was gonna try and take on. There's a line from that movie where someone calls Will Smith's character crazy because he's going to take on a organization that has an entire day of the week dedicated to them. Super Bowl, for a lot of people, is basically a holiday for them. I know my father-in-law will take off every year for Super Bowl. And but I think that in this movie, after the entire faculty has transitioned into aliens, the first line of students that they go after is the football team. And I think that there's a subtle social commentary that Williamson brings to that narrative decision that speaks about there's a line where they're going after students of influence, and of course you have the football team, and it kind of speaks volumes on how we as Americans hold up football almost as a religion to some extent.
It's really disconcerting, even as big of a fan as I am. I remember in elementary school, we would get essay prompts of, like, write about a hero, and the teacher would always need to go out of their way to be like, just because someone can throw a ball doesn't make them a hero. Like, keep that in mind. And I was never a big sports fan, so I was like, well, that's obvious. But I guess there are people who needed to hear that. Yeah, American football is such it's a specific thing specific to this country. No other country is really follows it as closely or as invested in it. I've spoken to people from different European countries who just find it so slow and so boring, especially when I worked for a company that was based in the Netherlands for a while. That was when I was just really getting into football, and they're like, oh, like, I don't understand, like, it's no good, except they would say it with a Dutch accent, which I'm not going to attempt. But it's there's obviously the NFL is so corrupt in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of stuff with CTE and with those concussions and those head injuries, and when you just look at the medical side of it, it's really unfortunate that there isn't more being done to make the game safer and just more enjoyable and make sure that we're taking care of those players. I do think they've come a long way, and they're always looking to do more research into helmets and things like that. But there's definitely still some problems. And when you look at some infamous stories, like Aaron Hernandez, who played for the New England Patriots, he murdered at least one person. There was some evidence in the autopsy that he had CTE and brain damage, and then that that could be attributed to his more violent behavior later. But it's amazing how much it can be, how much influence it has. In high school, I did theater. We had to pay $50 as a like an activity fee. And the thing that made me so upset was all of that money went to the football team, and they got new uniforms and new helmets and everything. And then for the theater department, we actually would need to pay additional money, sometimes, not all the time, but to afford costumes or afford set design stuff, which made me especially upset when we did the musical one year. Everyone was charged like $50 as a fee for it, for costumes, they said. And then I provided my own costume. I wore like khaki pants and a white button-down shirt, and I was so frustrated that I had to pay and did not get anything for it. So you have, I feel like in so many high schools, the football team especially gets proper treatment compared to the theatrical side of things. In this movie, it almost kind of makes sense because the principal makes a point of just like, I don't even think she really dislikes the arts, but she's like, have you seen the football field on a Friday night? Like, that's why we're putting so much money toward this. Like, it brings in so much. It's so popular. That's what the parents in this town want to see. And that's what we're going to be focused on. And I think it's a really good example of just where the priorities in like the American high school system is. And I don't think it's right. I hope we move and we're able to fund more things like music and humanities and arts. But for the time being, football and other sports are where it's at. That's just where the attention gets put. And I do think that's kind of unfortunate.
I would even beg to differ to say that it doesn't just stop at high school. Like, there's a lot of priorities. I was interviewing years ago. I used to be in ministry, and when I was interviewing for a church that was a potential partner for what I was doing at the time, and the guy, basically the pastor, was talking about how like he made it a priority to make sure that every person in his congregation got home to watch football on Sundays. And it's like, man, it's like, priorities, bro. Like,
yeah,
it's not something you should be concerned about. Like, that's what DVR is for. But I think also too, like, you know, we, as it starts in high school, it continues into college, because college football again is another big thing for a lot of people. You know, some people that go to college, like, you know, Notre Dame or like Alabama, you know, just to kind of Duke, just to kind of throw a couple colleges out there. Nothing to say bad about those colleges, but I know that a lot of people that attend those colleges and other bigger colleges are like apologists for their football team long after they graduate, and then it really peaks and it hits its ultimate fandom at the NFL. And I think to a extent, like, it's kind of like almost this unspoken religion, the way that a lot of us merchandise and the way that, you know, we kind of plan our schedules around games.
Yeah, college football is something I don't understand, because I don't get how someone can be so invested in something like that. It's just watching college players play a game. And I used to feel that way about the NFL. And in many ways, like, I get mad at myself when I think about how much of a fan I am now, because these are people I used to mock and just not get. And that's why I try to be more open to fandoms, because it's like, I don't care. Like, if you like football, like I like Star Wars, like, that's okay. And I feel like there's common ground to be able to have a conversation about how like passionate we are about that. But there's a lot of toxicity with those types of sports. And I've met way, way too many people who are just like the asshole alpha male, like dad type people who are like, oh, I'm going to watch football and drink a beer and ignore my kids. And it's going to be so much fun. And, oh, you caught a touchdown. That's so exciting. And it's like, I never want to end up like that. And when I meet people like that, it makes me feel so sour about the whole thing. And I've attended a couple Patriots games and it's so much fun. Some of the most fun that I've ever had. But you do see just people getting drunk and belligerent. And for me, there's a respect that I hold for not just my team, but anyone who plays the sport, anyone who coaches. Like it's examples of athleticism that I find really impressive. The thing that made me genuinely so upset was when I went to see my first game as a couple of years ago. They were playing the New York Jets, and when the Jets came onto the field, they just got booed. Everybody in the stadium just booed them so loud. Apparently, this is a thing that happens at NFL stadiums every game around the country. And I was just like, first of all, when a team visits another stadium, they are guests of that stadium. They're literally hosting that team. So it's like they deserve to be treated with respect. I don't think booing them is giving them the respect they deserve. But that's just one of those like weird things where people get caught up in the competitiveness of it and trying to just make the other team feel like trying to psych them out almost of like, oh, like you're not welcome here. And I don't appreciate that at all. What this movie does is it really nicely shows that like a small, like the high school example of that. And I love that we get that football scene later in the movie. And then the football team, they all get assimilated, which first of all, that like how familiar are the aliens with human beings? Like, did they know that one, football was a thing, and two, if they assimilate into the football team, they can then get all the other players by like tackling and being in close contact? And that looks so strange when like one person would be tackled and then they would like just vomit an alien like parasite into the ear of the other player, and it's like, that's no good. But then the aliens, of course, get a football army, which is so almost like satiric when they're all marching and there's like the marching sound effects and they're coming after our main characters. There's just a lot of weird moments in this movie, man. And the football part of it is definitely a big thing, both from the mental health with Stan wanting to get out of it and with them becoming just like brainwashed soldiers of like the alien queen. It's really interesting.
Well, so the alien queen at the end is revealed to be the new girl, a fellow student, and she talks about like, you know, how she came back from her planet, but we don't actually know how long she's been in America. So for all we know, like she could have like really studied and, you know, learned our customs and our ways and understand like how highly regarded we hold something like football, and specifically how high this town holds football. To go back to the earlier scene we were talking about with the staff meeting, they have the entire town. She says the entire town shows up. Like there's not one like seat empty when it is a home game. Like these football basically like keeps this town running. And so that's kind of my thing, is that like everything started with her. Like even the first scene that we get with Robert Patrick, just kind of like looking, like turning around after the practice and just kind of seeing like a shadow but not knowing who it is. And then, you know, I think that she just kind of studied it. But kind of keeping on the football, how did you feel about the end where Josh Hartnett joins the team?
That was kind of strange to me because at no point did he really show like athletic prowess. Like I don't understand how he could reliably play on that team. And also he's playing and smoking a cigarette at the same time at the end. And I'm like, what are you doing? You need to be like healthier, first of all. But Yeah, I don't know. That seemed like a really strange 180 because at no point did it seem to me like he had interest in that or like it would be something that he would do. It felt really strange for his character.
These all of these characters in the end kind of end up in unique places where it's like alluded to, like Hartnett's character ends up with the teacher, which was weird.
Also strange, yeah. The flirting between them was weird, and I get he was held back a year, so he's 18 or 19 at this point, and so that teacher and so Famke Janssen or Janssen, yeah. So Jean Grey from X-Men, she goes from being like this super awkward, shy kind of teacher who Josh Hartnett is really able to make feel uncomfortable and kind of get in her head, and then the alien takes over and she just becomes this like confident, sexy person who is now actively flirting with a student, and it's like, okay, that's a little weird. I'll let it slide, whatever. But yeah, you have it where the end of this film, you're right, all the characters are in these different places. I want to back up a little bit because there's one note that you put down of Elijah Wood on drugs, and it was so the scene when they all need to prove to each other that they're not aliens by taking Zeke's drug, and so they all take it one by one. I thought that was a really good idea, first of all, but secondly, it's just funny seeing each character kind of wig out. And this movie also had good foreshadowing because the two students who try to buy all of Zeke's supply, one of whom played by Danny Masterson, who's literally listed in the cast list as fuck up number one, they go to try and just buy up his entire supply. And it's like, oh, are these guys just trying to get super high? No, they knew that this drug could kill them. But I maintain that like salt would also be deadly to them, or coffee. Coffee's a diuretic. Like any other thing that would dehydrate you would also be effective here. But they made a big deal of having this magic dust be the thing that is their weakness.
So magic dust, Hartnett's character says, is a cross between caffeine and other household like cleaning products, I think is what he says. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know necessarily if coffee would have had the same effect, but it would have been worth a shot still. Like, it's just like, I mean, at the same time, like, I feel like we're watching this as an audience, and it's like, okay, like, hey, we know that this is a like horror movie, so you're gonna make horror movie decisions. And, you know, us from an audience is like, man, like, couldn't you just, like, grab something else that would, like, you know, dehydrate these guys, like, take away their water supply, like, something?
I love how they all need to gather around the water cooler to stay hydrated the entire movie, and they're just, all the teachers are just, like, drinking so much.
There's that montage scene where, like, they're just, like, loading, like, like, just, quarts and, like, gallons, like, the big water cooler jugs of water that they're just consistently going through. So funny.
Yep, and Jon-Stewart survives getting stabbed in the eye somehow. He's still alive at the end of the movie.
I didn't understand that.
I love seeing Elijah Wood in this film. I haven't watched much of his pre-Lord of the Rings career, and this must have been just before. So this movie came out in 98. The first Lord of the Rings movie was 2001, I think. And they filmed for like over 2 years. So he must have jumped into Lord of the Rings not all that much time after doing this movie.
Yeah, no, I want to say the filming began early 99 for Lord of the Rings, and this would have taken place probably in like the fall of 97, maybe later, but probably more than likely it was like 98. And so when you go from like looking at him here in this one, and then going to how mature he looks and acts in Lord of the Rings as Frodo Baggins, it's like night and day. I have a greater respect for Elijah Wood after kind of seeing like this and then going into Lord of the Rings.
Oh, and he's great in Sin City too, as the like this horrifying serial killer character. You never even really see his face. It's just a bright pair of glasses that he wears in his outline. But he's so creepy in that movie. Like he's phenomenal. I love seeing him in other stuff, and it's weird to think of Lord of the Rings filming in the 90s. Like, you think of that as an early 2000s movie, but it's like that whole process got started so much before then, before the millennium even changed. They were underway making it. And that's just, like, really strange to think about. It throws off my whole thing of time. Like, my whole perception of time is thrown off. We've talked about The Thing, the movie The Thing, especially John Carpenter's, which is the only version that I've seen, which is many people, I've heard it's either their favorite version or the best version. That drug scene where they're all taking it, there's questioning of like, well, you know, who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? And I was thinking of, are we going to end up with basically what happens in The Thing with each character kind of getting assimilated one by one, and then in the end, are you only going to have a couple left, and are they not going to be able to trust each other because they don't know which one, if they've been assimilated or not? I do have issues with the concept of a queen, because they said like, oh, we kill the queen, we kill everyone. That is such like a cop-out for me,
Really?
because it simplifies, it oversimplifies the entire thing. My biggest example of this being a problem is in the Avengers, when Tony Stark launches the nuke at the command ship, and then all of the Chitauri like shut down. They're not robots. They're sentient beings. Like, they should still be able to keep fighting even without their control ship. So that it just seems when a movie does this, where it's like, oh, we just have to take out this one thing and it will take out everything, it just feels like they're oversimplifying it for the sake of plot, which I don't really like.
Well, so for this one, I think it comes as a way to kind of be different just enough from the film, because tonally speaking, like, this is basically the Breakfast Club at night fighting the Thing. And you get a lot of those like similarities, you get a lot of those like same character moments. Like, we just talked about the characters ending up in different spots and like how it's like weird, and you definitely got that from like the Breakfast Club. But I think for Kevin Williamson, like, he wanted to create something that was kind of slightly different, because when you watch The Thing, like, I mean, that movie ends so hopelessly. And this kind of being a 90s film, you want to make sure that kind of everyone has that happy ending for the most part. I want to say, like, you know, I think Sydney kind of gets a version of that at the end of the first Scream movie, and even to an extent like the second Scream movie. But you know, I think that's kind of the reason with it. I agree with you. I think that it is kind of a cop-out. It just kind of feels like the writer got to a point where he's just like, I don't feel like doing this anymore. What's the easiest way that I can kind of get out of this? And that's kind of what we end up seeing with The Faculty. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
I definitely agree. Obviously, Elijah Wood's parents in this movie, I want to talk about them for a moment, because they don't understand him, it feels like, and it feels like they overreact because Elijah Wood thinks he's seen a faculty member be murdered. He feels like he's being chased. He brings the cops in. The cops don't find any evidence, and his dad especially seems to jump right to like, oh, you're grounded, no TV, no internet, nothing, like you're not going to leave this room. And it's like he says a moment before that he's like a straight A student and a really good kid, and he just seems to go berserk from this one misstep that his parents think they have. Like, that feels like such an overreaction. If he really was such a good kid, like, why would you go this crazy if he made one mess up and you feel that he like either broke the rules or falsified a police report? It didn't seem to make much sense for me, and I don't really like his dad in this movie. He doesn't seem like a good dude.
Well, it goes to a later. It kind of speaks a little bit of volumes, I think, too, about how a lot of us kind of react when we see things that we can't really explain or can't really put into words, is because like we can't fathom them logically or intellectually. And there's a conversation later in the movie with Elijah Wood and the goth girl whose name I'm forgetting at the moment. It's like starts with an S. But Elijah says something to the extent of, when it comes to science fiction, we focus so much on the science and not enough, or we focus so much on the fiction and not enough on the science. Mm-hmm. And I think that really kind of speaks a lot of weight to things like, how history has kind of talked to us about these like miraculous signs and wonders that have been portrayed. Like, if we can't explain with science, then clearly that person can't believe, you're wrong. And I think that's why Williamson kind of like subtly almost serves as like a social commentary on like how we process things of like deities and like religious studies and stuff along like that, like stuff that if it can't be rationally explained, then it must be science fiction. Like, I believe in aliens. I believe that we can't be the only intelligent life within the universe. Universe just seems a bit too big. I've made it no point on this podcast to deny my faith. I believe in God, and a lot of that stuff, can't be proved scientifically always. But, there are historical evidence and weird stories that have been, accumulated throughout the history of mankind that, can also speak to that. But again, it's like we focus so much on the, the fictional side of it. Like, if it can't be explained rationally, then clearly someone's wrong and it can't be me.
And you have to look at time, too, right? Like, the universe is so big, but it's also so old. So it's possible that intelligent life could have existed billions of years ago, thrived, and died out, and that's why we're not seeing it. It's also possible that we're relatively early, and billions of years from now, after human beings have moved on, there will be other intelligent life that will also be seeking out others, and we would have died out a long time ago. I like, what movie does she reference specifically? Is it Invasion of the Body Snatchers? I think it is. Yeah, I like that. And she's like, oh, it's like, maybe these characters were visited by aliens. And she even mentions, I think, like George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, like maybe aliens, or they're aliens themselves. And they're just trying to warn us by putting it into pop culture. And that's a trope. I forget what show or movie, but that's another thing that like filmmakers have been trying to prepare us for the arrival of aliens for a long time now, by putting it into movies. But I forget which one mentions that. I'll have to see if I can remember. But it's I like that they're focusing now more on like, okay, is there real parts to science fiction? My fiance has said that it seems likely that J.R.R. Tolkien, his worlds in Middle Earth are so vibrantly described and so feel well lived in. It's like did he just stumble across a portal one day that brought him to Middle Earth, and now he's just like telling us what he saw there? Like that seems somewhat likely with just how like imaginative these worlds can be.
I mean, I personally wouldn't put it beyond the realm of possibilities, and I'm going to ask you a question that I feel like could open up a black hole into completely other podcasts, and so just kind of if we feel like this needs to be a spin-off podcast, we can do it. But do you believe in aliens? Do you believe in alternative realities and like other life that's out there?
Yes and yes. So I, without getting too far in the weeds with this, I believe in most things. I don't think you can disprove a negative, so I always try to keep an open mind that there are things that exist. As far as aliens, the universe is too big and too old for there to just be one. And if you do believe in a higher power, whether that's God or some other energy force kind of keeping the universe moving, I do think that humans can't just be the only things out there. And to think that we are is a very... there's a concept known as carbon chauvinism, which I love that term because it's really funny to me. But to be a carbon chauvinist is the idea of like, oh, we're the only humans, we're the only carbon-based organisms out there. I think there definitely could be more life out there. There likely is more life out there. It's just so unlikely that we are going to come across it in our lifetime, again, because of just the age and space of the universe. As far as like alternate realities and things, I think it makes myself feel better of like if I'm having really bad luck one day, it's like, oh, well, there's a Dan out there somewhere who's having a really good day. Or if I stumble across something really good or something really good happens to me, it's like, well, another Dan is not having a very good time. It helps remind me of just how like unique and interesting this world is. And this is more of a philosophical debate, but I read a quote many years ago that said sometimes it feels like this planet is another planet's hell. And when I think about it, between war and poverty and starvation and oppression, and it's like, oh, maybe, yeah, there are utopias out there. And it's like our punishment is to come live here, where it's like you have to work for 60 years and just, do all this stuff and wake up early in the morning and deal with a body that breaks down and gets old and sickness and all these things that happen. I do think that, especially with 2020, with everything that went down that year, we have there's a possibility that it's like this is, to borrow from Community, like this is the darkest timeline. Like this is where things just really start to go awry. So long answer to your questions, but yes and yes, because there's more to the world and the universe than what's directly in front of our eyes, and to deny that, I think, is just willful ignorance at this point. But you don't know what you don't know, and I know that there's a lot that I don't know, and there's so much more to be learned. So that's where I stand with that.
And when you're talking about stuff that still needs to be learned, I want to back up just a little bit to Casey's parents. And there's a scene where they're talking specifically to the administration about Selma-Hayek's character and her transition that, him and Delilah witness, and Christopher McDonald, who plays the father, says something along the lines of, a straight A student and he needs help or he needs a shrink. And that, to me, it really broke my heart that here you have a character that cares about his son's grades, a father nonetheless, but doesn't actually care about his mental health. And I think that also kind of speaks volumes, and we've talked about it on the show before, but it speaks volumes about the way that our society and processes the relationship between men and mental health, where, to go back to what we were talking about previously is, you talk about how high we regard football as a culture and how brutal it can be. And I don't want to say barbaric sometimes, but it can get pretty brutal when you look at some of the medical side of what football is capable of doing and the injuries that can come with it at sometimes. But I think that's kind of the depiction that we place on men sometimes, is that we have to be these hulking rage machines that are just ready to tackle at a moment's notice, and that we can't have these mental health crises, or we can't take our own mental health seriously. And I think that's kind of poisoned a lot of the way that men as a whole process mental health. I know for me, being married, that has changed my opinion a great deal because of being married. But before we got engaged, I was very stoic, and I was that way because that was what culture teaches. Men don't talk about their mental health. You bottle it up, it'll explode one day, and then you repeat the process.
Yeah, I've historically have had difficulties expressing emotions in person. I'm not sure that's more of a guy thing and more of just a mental block that I have had from growing up. But it's nice to see different movies try and expand on this concept and show people that it's okay to be vulnerable, be emotional, to really break outside of your comfort zone, and to have meaningful conversations with the people around you. I like that this cast of characters is so diverse and unique, and the different characters from different backgrounds. Some appear to be rich, some are poor, some are really athletic, others are really nerdy. They come together in just this group that has to work together on necessity. They become distrustful of each other because of this whole thing. And then with that blonde girl, that exchange student from Atlanta, being the alien queen, it's I feel I guess she should have been the obvious suspect from the very beginning, but I wasn't sure who the queen was, where they were going to find her, or what was going on in that way. But this movie was cool. The pacing was really good. The runtime was relatively short, and it just included this whole cast of characters that was really awesome to see on screen. And the final battle with the queen was such a cool practical effects showdown of this just giant grotesque monster. That was awesome to see.
I'm not gonna lie, I really thought that Robert Patrick's character was going to be the queen, because he's the first person that we get to see turned in the movie as the audience. And so when they go to the principal, they shot her, and she ended up shrinking basically and kind of deforming as the larvae or whatever the alien's original form was. They're like, oh no, it's not her. And honestly, I was like, okay, cool, it's the coach. What a nice twist. And then they threw me for another loop. I didn't see it coming, but once they kind of put everything in perspective, I was like, her bad guy monologue kind of summed it up. I was like, all right, I can get behind that.
Yeah. Do you think there are others out there, maybe another queen or just other aliens that could this whole process start up again, do you think?
Man, I would love to see that. What if yeah was actually Usher was the next queen, and him and Little John just teamed up, and they're like, hey, we're gonna make an alien anthem, and everyone's gonna just fall under the power and the authority of this song, and it'll be great.
Yeah, I would either want to see this cast come back 20 years later and do it, and that would be just so fun to see all these people together again. Or if they wanted to reboot it, I feel they could take whatever this generation of like young actors are. I'm thinking of like Sabrina Carpenter, who is on Girl Meets World, and she's had success with a bunch of films recently. Rowan Blanchard, who is also on Girl Meets World. I guess those are the main child actors I know right now. But you see, or like High School Musical, the series has a bunch of teenagers as well. Like, just get a group of those popular actors together to make a grotesque film like this. I think it would be cool to see in 2021. And it would be a little different from like the other big blockbuster types I feel like we're seeing. Like, if they wanted to go back and do especially more with like the practical effects and the fabrication of the aliens and these different creatures that they're showing, like, that would be really cool to see. I would definitely want to check that out.
Yeah, I'd be down for that. And I don't know if you know this or not, but we both watched this movie this past Thursday, and it was coincidentally Elijah Wood's 40th birthday when we viewed this movie for the first time.
I had no idea. It's crazy to think that in Lord of the Rings, when he was filming, he was 18 years old. Like, I think about what I was doing at 18, and it was not running around New Zealand filming a blockbuster film. Like, that makes me feel like I need to get more on the ball with doing things with my life.
What is my life even?
Yeah. Man, I want to do more just adventure-y stuff. Like, basically Lord of the Rings, just like running across a mountain range. I want to do that. That's why I'm trying to get like more physically active and stronger to be able to do these types of things that you see like Elijah Wood and Orlando Bloom and Viggo Mortensen doing those films. Like, it's just so cool.
Yeah. I want to just throw this out there before we leave. My favorite part of this movie, and I want to hear yours too, was when they killed Famke Janssen's character and her head, like, she got decapitated and then her head grew tentacles. That was my favorite part of this movie. Did you have like a specific part that you loved?
I really liked the moment, like the whole showdown in the pool with the queen, and when I forget which character gets knocked into the pool, but it became like an aquatic monster film, and she's trying to escape, and you can see the shadow of the monster underwater, and then you can see just like the sharp teeth and everything. It reminded me of older movies like Alligator or Lake Placid. Like, the moment you're in the water, like, you are not safe. There's something underneath the water that is gonna harm you. Which reminds me, we should cover Alligator sometime, because that's a movie I saw once when I was like 6. It made me not want to go in my swimming pool for a long time. And I love those like old classic monster films. But yeah, this movie really brought me back to that with that pool scene. It was really memorable.
I've never even heard of the movie Alligator, but I'm about it. You know me.
So
I'm looking it up right now.
I'll share one scene with you, which is why I was in the pool. It might have been the night of Halloween, but there's this young kid, maybe 8 or 9. They were playing a prank was being played on him by his brothers or his friends, and they blindfold him and they bring him out to the swimming pool. It's an in-ground pool, and they bring him on to the diving board, and they're basically going to make him walk the plank. And they turn the light on the pool, and there's a huge alligator under the water sitting there with its mouth open. And the kid sees this and he screams, and then the kids push him in because they didn't see the alligator, and he gets eaten. And it was just so scarring and so horrifying. Josh, I'll send you this clip so you can check it out. But definitely a fun like 80s monster film that would be good to see.
All right, you sold me. Alligator. 1980. It's coming to Victims and Villains in the near future. I'm all about it. But I think that's going to do it for us on this episode. Talking about The Faculty. If you guys have seen The Faculty, what did you guys think? How does it stack up in the pantheon of Kevin Williamson's movie career? With Scream 2, Halloween H2O, and also, how does it hold up in Robert Rodriguez's career, which is we talked about this in From Dusk Till Dawn. Like, this, guy has such an interesting library of films that this movie doesn't even feel like a Robert Rodriguez movie, and it feels like the black sheep of like his filmography. I'm not gonna lie, like I've seen a good deal of his movies, but this one definitely feels like kind of the black sheep of it.
Yeah, it definitely does. He feels like he does everything from just like super weird rated R films to like fun kids movies. Like it's so strange seeing the various different genres he tackles.
Yeah. Well, all right. So that's gonna do it for us. Dan, where can people find you online?
You can find me over on Twitter at drock6499. Post a lot of video game stuff over there, a lot of PS5 share stuff. So follow me over there.
And you guys can follow me on Letterboxd. It's at Captain Nostalgia. And speaking of Letterboxd, Victims and Villains is also there, along with Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch. Victimsandvillains.net will get you access to all of our social media, movie reviews, past episodes that Dan and I have done, and more. And most importantly, it'll also provide you guys with our our suicide prevention resource library, the real reason why we do Victims and Villains. So all of those are going to be in the show notes for wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us, talking about 1998's The Faculty. We'll be back this Tuesday talking about the brand new Netflix drama Malcolm and Marie. Until next time, have a good night, guys, and make sure that you guys keep some magic dust on you just in case the aliens are around.